Don't you love the little silence? Hi, everybody. There's 18 people. Hello. There's Emma. I'll say g'day. Oh. Thanks, Roger. Roger's just saying he loves the Fleabag cameo.
Oh, good.
It's my dog. Thanks, Rog.
Okay, we might get started if that's okay. And I'd like to welcome you. My name's Rob Moody. I'm the chair of the Centre for Alcohol Policy Research's Advisory Board and delighted to be so. And I'll be emceeing this afternoon. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land which I happen to live and work, and to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which our panelists and the participants live and work, and to, I guess, acknowledge the traditional custodians here, how important their sort of custodianship and commitment to the land has been over millennia, and how, in fact, John Batman got 600,000 acres for 150 pounds of flour and 250 handkerchiefs and some tomahawks. And then William Barrack and Simon Wonga got 2,500 acres up at Coranderrk Mission for only 60 years. So this land has never been ceded, and that custodianship still exists. And I'd like to acknowledge traditional leaders, their custodian, past and present and emerging. So thank you very much for being here. Today's event will run for about an hour to facilitate a discussion for 40 minutes, and then we'll bring in Q&A, but please use Q&A function anytime. You can use the chat function for discussion, but we'd love to get your questions, and we'll build them in as much as we can. So today's a great opportunity for an in-depth discussion about women and drinking in Australia. While overall, obviously, men still drink much more than women, and most of the population has reduced drinking over the last decade, women's drinking has remained stable and is actually increasing in some age groups. And as hopefully many of you will have seen Shaun Micallef's recent show that we've been involved in on the Source, Australian women are drinking at book clubs, retirement villages, parties and gatherings. On social media, there's been equal parts bonding and outrage over memes mocking women, mocking wine mums who need a glass of rosé to take the edge off parenting. So we know that the research is showing that women do appear to be at greater risk of some chronic diseases, even with lower amounts of lower volumes of alcohol consumption. Yet overall, women still drink a lot less and cause, in a sense, a much smaller proportion of alcohol-related harms in society. So should we be worried about women's drinking? Or is this an unwarranted concern given the big gap between women and men's alcohol consumption? And as drinking becomes more socially acceptable for women, what risks should they and we all be aware of? We will have close to 100 people attending from across Australia. We really do welcome your questions, so feel free to ask on the Q&A at any time during the session. So we'd love to hear from you. I'd first like to introduce our wonderful panelists. And the first is Shanna Wan, who's in Narrabri, where it's about 44, 45 degrees. So she's really sweltering. She's the CEO, founder, and force of nature behind the national charity Sober in the country. She's a self-described garden variety recovered alcoholic who was fortunate enough to make it back from the brink of death. And she chooses to use her very imperfect life story, like ours, to pay forward and offer hope for those still in the fight. Shanna's a respected leader in the alcohol awareness area. Her conversations have become a national charity with a laser focus on bringing common sense, how wonderful, common sense talk and advocacy to the overlooked demographic of hardworking rural, regional and remote Australians who are more than familiar with the concept of living in isolation. Unfortunately, Shanna, I'll have to duck out early to attend another meeting, but thank you very much for being with us, Shanna. Sandra Kunsch, who's Principal Research Fellow at the Centre for Alcohol Policy Research at La Trobe. She also serves as Director of Research at La Trobe's School of Psychology and Public Health and is the Secretary of the Kettlebrun Society. She's the lead researcher on a very interesting project called the Ripple Project that aims to reduce alcohol use of middle-aged women in the ACT. And Sandra is also deputy editor of a great journal, Drug and Alcohol Review, that many of you do know. Lastly, Cassandra Wright. Cassandra is an NH and MRC Early Career Research Fellow based in the Menzies School of Health Research at Darwin, so it's a mere 33 degrees there, and an honorary research fellow at the Centre for Alcohol Policy Research. Her work is primarily focused on interventions and policies to reduce alcohol harms. Really, really useful stuff. Her PhD examined the development, testing and translation of a smartphone delivered alcohol intervention administered during drinking events. And Cassandra works with Sandra on the Ripple project. So welcome to all of you. And I'd love to start with some straight questions. Sandra, with respect to your work, can you tell us a bit about your research into women's drinking, and particularly, I guess, the work that you're doing on mothers of young children drinking to cope with the whole issues of work, family, parenting balance? Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction. I think I want to make it a little broader because actually women are quite recent when it comes to alcohol research. So alcohol research has a long-standing tradition, but women only figure in it as a separate part or something that actually merits interest for the last 25 to 30 years. And that caught my attention because women deal with so many things in their lives and alcohol is one part of it. So what I'm doing in my research is focusing in particular on working mothers, because these women have to do splits between dealing with the family issues at the same time while working. And most of us experience that. That can be quite stressful. And research has shown that these kind of stresses relate to alcohol use, so increase alcohol use. And that's what we found in our studies as well. And we were interested in what might be the mechanisms behind that. And in a quite recent study, we could show that women try to cope with these stresses, and especially those who report that they are drinking for coping reasons, that they are the most likely ones to increase their consumption to levels which are becoming unhealthy. So there's a mechanism that's actually putting these women at risk just by coping with their kind of daily matters.
Great, thanks very much, Sandra. Shanna, can you tell us a bit about your experience working with country women and drinking? Are there particular challenges for them? And I guess just the challenges that they're facing, and how are they really starting to cope with that?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Thank you for the intro and for getting my name right. Extra points to you forever and ever. Hi, everybody who's listening in. It's lovely to see you. As you guys know, yeah, we have a laser focus on the rural demographic for obvious reasons. And I need to clarify probably really quickly, I'm not a mum, but I speak non-stop to mums all over Australia, especially rural mums. And the common thread, whether you're a mum or not a mum, mind you, is that geographic isolation. As Rob said in the intro, ISO is our way of life. And so we have consistently got the issue of not just geographical isolation from people, places, things, services, and support. We're socially isolated as well. And so it's a really common piece of feedback we get from the amazing women who share their stories with us privately or in our peer support group. It's just the loneliness. And I know that you can feel very, very lonely in the city also. That's unquestionable. And now people are understanding that more than ever. But in a rural setting, there's a limit on where else you can go. So let's say you're struggling to belong here or find support there. Unless you're prepared and willing and able to drive hundreds of kilometres, you've got to make it work wherever you are and whatever circumstances are facing you. And of course, there's the fact that for those of you who may not be aware, the alcohol culture in the country is extraordinarily heavy. It's kind of the pivotal centerpiece of most of our social interactions to this day. So it's a hard one for ladies in the country. Nothing surer.
Great, thanks, Shanna. We'll come back to a lot of those issues in a minute. Cassandra, can you tell us about the Ripple project and what's it aiming to do?
Sure, thanks for having me. So this is a project that we're partnering with the Foundation for Alcohol Research and Education for. So we've been working with women aged 40 to 65 to better understand their alcohol consumption, what drives it, what they know and what they don't know about alcohol, but also how they conceptualize changing drinking behaviors. So it's led us to co-design a tool with women to help them to reduce their drinking. And so in this project, what we really want to do is help women to understand their own alcohol use better and the context that it occurs in, so that they have all of the information as well as the tools to make empowered choices about if and how alcohol fits into their life. So it's been a really fascinating process, and we've learned so much from all of the women that have given their time to the research.
Right, thanks, Cass. I mean, I'll jump right in with a question from the audience, which is about sort of how we understand these issues and how do we talk about them. And it's the notion of one of our attendees found it the title was a little stereotyping to women, as we never discuss about men and beer. But why do we need to make a big deal about women and wine? Surely alcohol creates risks for everyone, regardless of gender or socioeconomic references. I'm curious to know why the language is constructed to make gendered with the tone of stereotyping for women and mothers. Sandra, do you want to have a crack?
Yeah, would love to. I agree. It shouldn't be a special issue. It shouldn't be something that we should address different from men's. Nevertheless, it's something that we noticed in research that women doing more than before, which is always a bit concerning because there seem to be drivers that actually encourage women to drink more than they used to drink before. And I think we have to get a good understanding what this is, and we have to at least give those women a chance of making informed decisions. And I think that's what this whole thing is about, because the industry is quite strong in this area. I think we have to be heard as well as a kind of more neutral and maybe not so nice voice in the back of someone's head and saying, wait a second, maybe you should think twice, or maybe just think first and make your decision then. If you're drinking for stress, maybe there are better ways of dealing with it. If it's for a social good reason, why not? We are not moralizing. We just want to give people the chance of making informed decisions.
Right, thanks.
I
Thanks.
might jump in as well, if you don't mind, because I have to admit that the title was something that I had a part in. And it's because I think we really should have this conversation about whether or not we should be focusing on women's drinking or not. And so that's why we had something in there in the spiel about, is this moral panic? Because you're right, we don't talk about beer dads so much. And so I think that's something that we're going to cover off in a bit more detail. Women's drinking is definitely talked about differently on social media and in the media as well. So we have to have that as part of our conversation when keeping it in the context when we're talking about women's drinking.
Yeah, and maybe, Cass, you could just develop that first in terms of the social media and the discussions. So how is it coming to the fore on social media? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think something that we should talk about is that so women are sharing these memes and people are kind of tagging their mums in these memes. But behind all of that, the joke is around alcohol, but it's also about needing alcohol to cope with stresses of life. And so we have to have those conversations together. Women have greater participation in the workforce than ever before, but they still carry a greater burden of the caring and home responsibilities. So it makes sense that women are overwhelmed and struggling to cope, and that they're bonding over their daily struggles. So I agree with Sandra, we shouldn't be shaming them for that, but we have to talk about whether alcohol is really the answer for that. It's kind of dangerous to laugh it off without talking about what it represents, because it's also a message that the industry latches onto and that they push further as well to try and convince women that it is normal and it's funny and it's the best option right here and right now. So we kind of have to, I think when you see those memes, it's important to kind of be critical of them, but also think about, well, why are women feeling that stress and feeling that their day-to-day life is so challenging to juggle?
Yeah, I very much agree, because in these memes, it's not the struggle, it's not the problem that's put forward, it's the kind of an easy solution presented. And it's something that's shared because it can easily take the edge off a hard day. And it may, but it may also be a way of making your problems deepen, of creating something in a kind of normality you don't really want to create. I think we have to have the discussion why these women are drinking more and why these women experience the stress and therefore go to alcohol to relieve it. So I think that's the discussion we have to have. Not necessarily that women are drinking and that they are drinking more than they used to, but why they are drinking and what can we do to alter this.
Yeah, and Shanna, obviously you were just talking about the high concentration of drinking in the culture in the bush. What's happening in your neck of the woods?
Well, interestingly, as I was saying, ISO is kind of how it's our normal. So COVID did not impact us anywhere near like it impacted Melbourne or Sydney or whatever. But what did impact people was not the pandemic, but the absolute barrage out of nowhere that was relentless for months and months on end, which was the wine time memes. And it really was hectic amongst the women's demographic. So I back the girls 100% there. And from the perspective of someone who works in a group to see the impact of that, because our peer network discusses it off, the radar non-stop. And it was really incredibly distressing for so many of the women that are either contemplating getting sober or reducing or whatever it might be. It didn't matter whether they were at contemplation over here or in actual recovery from addiction over here. It was no less distressing on any of them. And it wasn't just the occasional meme that we're used to. It was, hey, it's midday, but it's COVID, so let's crack a shardy. And it was just relentless. Like I think there was a one, and then the videos started coming and there was the one of the pommy girl. It was funny if you're not an alcoholic. She's perched up outside of her home having a wine and someone comes jogging past and she goes, what are you doing going for a run? It's only 7 a.m., And as as Sandra was saying, it's just that inane, relentless normalization of, hey, it's COVID, who cares? And as a person who descended into alcoholism, as everybody knows, that's part of my story. The normalization of alcohol in my life really contributed to that because no one would challenge it. So it's a really serious issue, and it's well worth discussing. Yeah, and it is different with women. It manifests and presents very differently.
Thanks, Shanna. The other point that you really bring up, I guess, is the role of the industry. And Emma Saliba, one of our participants, has brought up that issue. What's their role? So I guess also ask of Sandra and Cass in terms of, well, what's happened with COVID and what's happened with the industry at the same time.
Yeah, so I think the alcohol industry does have a big part to play in this whole story of women drinking more. So potentially part of it is organic, women's liberation, women being allowed in spaces that they traditionally weren't. That's part of it, but the alcohol industry has also recognized that there's a market here. So women drinking more means women buying more alcohol, which means more profit for them. And there's so many, there's considerable efforts to not only attempt to make one product look more appealing over another product, but also to get women to drink more overall by selling the idea that alcohol is normalized in spaces where it previously wasn't. So to sell the idea that a glass of red wine is good for you, to get you to open and buy a bottle more regularly, to create conflict in your head about what's good for you versus what's not good for you. And so in the context of COVID, I think it's important to understand that alcohol marketing isn't as simple as it used to be. So it's not a billboard and it's not a TV ad that you either see or you don't see anymore. With social media and with smartphones, these companies and companies in general know more about you than you'd care to find out. So they can pinpoint moments where you might be more likely to be nudged into a decision to drink. So some really powerful work came out of the Cancer Council WA and FARE that showed that alcohol companies were really trying to kick people while they were down with during COVID. And so they were heavily targeting people with messages around drinking to cope with stress. And so on top of that, I tried an alcohol delivery company once just to see how it worked. And until I deleted the app, I was getting notifications right at knockoff time every day telling me it was time for a drink, offering me promo codes, reminding me of what I'd ordered last time. And so especially in times of stress, when we know that people are struggling to cope, the way that the alcohol industry has approached this is, I would say, pretty abhorrent. But in general, it's happening all the time, every day, and we struggle to understand it because I don't see what's on your feed, Rob, and you don't see what's on mine. Sandra doesn't see what's on her child's feed, what kind of advertising they're getting targeted with either. So it's really, really difficult to regulate. And we're talking about not just advertising, but advertising a product that causes more harm than any other drug.
And Cass, in addition to what you were just saying there, another thing that people will have noticed is that, and this did definitely impact us, is people who were jumping on to use internet services to research where to go for alcohol help were then triggering a whole new influx of ads because the keyword alcohol, that's how the algorithm works. So suddenly their news feeds are filled with Dan Murphy's and BWS and every commercial under the sun because they typed in and searched under the word alcohol. So it's horrendous. It was coming at them from all sides. Yeah, really bad.
I just can echo that. So as an alcohol researcher, my Google feed is very much alcohol inspired. And it's amazing. And how good these algorithms work, but against us. So they are just constantly feeding us with information, and especially in a situation where you're stuck at home and where your only connection is via the internet and via these kind of social media. So it's more and more and more that's feeding in the same kind of narrative. And especially it's nicely done, I have to admit that. So it's always this kind of merit. You had a hard day, you earned your glass of wine. That's what you need right now. I'm the mom of 2 teenage kids. So honestly, at the end of the day, you're getting susceptible to these kind of ideas because they are fed on a regular basis. You see it from your friends who are posting a glass of wine. You see it from your newsfeed. It's everywhere. And it's just, after a while, difficult to ignore or,
Thank you. Thanks, all of you. I just want to come back to a really interesting issue around service access from Maria de Grazia. And she talks about her client list having grown a lot over the last few years with women drinking at levels that really do place them at pretty high risk of alcohol-related harms. She's working in regional areas, and a lot of her clients are from rural locations. Many barriers exist for women accessing those services, and a lack of services in general in her region. So perhaps, Shani, you could have a crack at that.
Maria's dead set, spot on. The barriers are insurmountable. In fact, Sober in the Country as a charity was created based on my experience as someone falling through the cracks of high functioning alcoholism in the country. And when I reached out for help, it was nothing but hurdle, barrier. And I have to say, in all honesty, in all of the years, and I tried so many things so many times, in the end, nothing that was a professional service was of any assistance to me whatsoever. I could not get my hands on anything within a bull's roar of where I lived. It was simply not possible. Yeah, it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling, the gap in services and support. And I'm not surprised at all to hear Maria say that because, sorry, Marie, for those who may not know, in the rural space, I know the rest of Australia has been hit really hard with the pandemic. Out west, we've had up to a decade of really horrific drought. And with that comes a subsequent increase in mental health, stress, financial burden, you name it, whatever you can possibly imagine. And so, of course, with that, there is a lift and a correlation in drinking because and as I would say, if I was sitting down with any politician or any, influential person, I'd say, I promise you, the average country person is not going to pick up a phone and ring a helpline. They're probably going to go to the fridge and pick up a beer and sit on the veranda. There were no really tailored messages from a bush perspective with a bush tone for bush people. And again, that's literally why Sober in the Country now exists. So we can just talk a language because we live here, we get it, we understand it, and fingers and toes crossed, we'll just keep gathering momentum because the point of identification for rural and regional people is not there. We're still using city-based models and ideas for rural and remote people. And I think we can meet in the middle, and that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, I'm yet to hear of a rural person, and I ask this question often, who has acknowledged they're in trouble, reached out for help, taken action and found it. It's never, ever, ever a simple process. Right. It's really disheartening. So, yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about, who's part of your group and how it operates, do you get any pushback by virtue of the work that you do?
Great question, Rob, because it's very in line with what Cass and Sandra have been saying, because this is very specific to women. So we have a peer support group called the Bush Tribe. It's very laser focused on the rural demographic, again, purely because nobody else does anything for that demographic. People like myself who are busy, can't leave their business or farm or kids or whatever to go and travel. So all we're doing is giving them a connection point and a safe place to land and talk and investigate. And again, that point of identification is alone saving lives. And here's the fascinating thing, 85% of the members of our group are women, and 80% of that 80% are women between 30 and 60. It's extraordinary. When time and funding and support permits, I want to really delve into that, because I don't believe the reason is that women are worse or different fundamentally. I think they're better communicators. They're really good at reaching out to other women and having a chat. And I think that they're a little bit more savvy with the internet in that age group. Our bush fellows tend to just go, nope, if it involves the internet, I'm not interested, I'm busy on the tractor or whatever. So I think we're missing massive portion of blokes. But there's zero doubt whatsoever that there's a really particular issue for rural women. They are lonely, their kids have left home, we have an aging population, again, drought, hardship, financial stress. We're tired. and we're pretty sick of doing it tough. And yeah, and I think the heartbreaking aspect of it is when you reach out, as I said, when you're actually sitting there in the wilderness with your hand in the air saying, okay, I get it, I really need help. What now? There's just crickets. There's resounding silence. And you've got one tiny little charity out there trying to meet a gap that should actually be getting funded federally and by a state, but where, you know, anyway, that's a separate issue. But there's a monstrous gap. And to answer your second question, Rob, pushback, etc. Interestingly enough, in the early days, I was totally criticised. I had a lot of pushback. I had a lot of criticism. People don't like people coming up with new ideas and thinking outside the box. But I expected that, and I knew it was going to come, and I knew exactly where it was going to come from, and so it was no drama. What's extraordinary is the last year since COVID-19 has literally flipped all of our critics out on their ears, because for the first time in a lot of people's lives, they now have a concept of how extremely heartbreakingly difficult it is to overcome addiction in isolation. Suddenly, everybody gets it. And that is what we face day in and day out. And it's not going to change just because the borders are open and because shops are going back to functioning. So I feel like 2020 has been a very big breakthrough year for us because of A, COVID, but B, because of years and years of hard work in the background. So again, like I said earlier, I feel like there's so many opportunities for rural people to work with the Casses and Sandras and fairs and Hello Sunday mornings. And, you know, I think the really positive thing in this is that it has forced us all to collaborate and work on solutions together, and using this wonderful, wonderful tool, the magical interweb, as I call it. And we're finding solutions, you know, and I think we just have to really keep pushing at that. And weirdly enough, we can actually probably offer a hell of a lot of learning through the fact that it is something we've had to cope with since day dot. So very interesting conversation.
There's a lot of bombardment for the industry, but also there's a lot of potential for actually trying to manage that and cope with that at the same time. Yeah, I just coming back actually to the issue around a really interesting point around social media raised by Jason Ferris. He's saying that I imagine the photography and social media promoted by influencers or industry would be showing full glasses, 200 or 250 ml glasses of wine, not 100 mils. So it's not only the drinking that's promoted, but it's the volume of serve is also influenced. Cass, maybe you'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of those other sneaky ways that the industry or industries all have at their hands now that they previously didn't. Is that there's more space to not only directly advertise to people, but to use people who are influential figures for advertising as well, in a way that, you know, regular people can become influencers now, and they're taking pictures of their normal life. So it really does fuel that normalization. And you're right, what they have in those pictures is absolutely unlikely to be the more controlled messages that you would see in more regulated advertising through traditional media as well.
Yeah, really, thanks very much, Cass. And Sandra, I might come back again to this issue of how we discuss the issue of women's drinking, because it's again from one of our participants. You know, is there a risk of stigmatizing or pathologizing mothers' consumption of alcohol by problematizing? We mentioned before that, you know, women still drink a lot less than men, causing less harm to others, including children. The qualitative work shows that many mothers drink for pleasure, reward, adult time, and so on. So we obviously want to avoid any moralizing or hysteria towards mothers drinking, which is, I think, the way we try to frame today's discussion. So the question is, can you see any risks of questioning or problematizing mothers' consumption? Is it framing the debate in this way necessarily helpful to mothers?
I think it is. To answer the question, I think it is important to have this discussion because, as we said before, there is no need to moralize it. No one wants to do that. No one wants to blame someone. It's just we are up against an army of online images, against the normalization of if you do this all day, you should have your drink, and you should have a large drink, and you should share it, and you should share it on social media.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to understand, that we are instrumentalized in a way, and that we are played. And I think no one wants that. So my point is actually just giving women the chance of understanding what the risks are, what they really want to do,
Yeah.
how they are manipulated potentially into doing something that's not in their best interest. It's not taking away the booze forever and don't drink at all and let a man do whatever they want to do. It's just women never were the target group, and there's very little prevention, there's very little intervention that targets women at all. So actually, we may create problems for those women in the long run, and we don't have a way of dealing with these problems later on. So I think it's better now to make informed decisions and give them all the tools they need to actually choose whether they want to have this glass of wine or whether it's maybe not what they need that day.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, it's sort of a follow on from that. I think it's Mary Walker's question. So she's wondering if emphasising the idea of women being empowered to make a personal choice is the best way to go, given the influences on individuals' choices will continue. She worries that places a high burden on individuals will end up being understood as a kind of gendered moralising, even if it's not intended that way. Anyway, so how would you as the panellists have a view on whether there are or should be other options rather than individually focused interventions?
I can have a crack at that if you don't mind.
Go.
So I absolutely agree that individual behaviour change approaches are not the only way that we're going to see any change. So we know that with all health, there's different levels of determinants that can influence health, right from the economic and political right down to the individual level, with kind of society being somewhere in the middle too. And you do need a balance of these approaches to be able to see the changes that you want in terms of health outcomes. So I think I completely agree. It's important to not moralize this, and we can't forget about men's drinking either. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore that women's drinking is increasing, and that the level that many women in Australia currently drink at results in avoidable deaths. It results in accidents and injuries and avoidable cancers and other preventable chronic diseases. So we can kind of hold those two thoughts at the same time, be aware of gendered policing, be aware of moral panic, but also realise that we still need to think about women's alcohol use at the same time that we think about men's alcohol use too. And how we do that, I completely agree. So Australia, has some pretty interesting, an interesting history of alcohol policies, some which have shown to be effective at reducing alcohol consumption, and some that have been less effective as well. So I think those conversations are still happening. What we really need to be thinking about is that the alcohol industry in Australia and in a lot of places is a really strong force of nature. So Sandra was saying, like, they're strong, they're there, they're fighting against what public health people see as the appropriate outcomes and measures as well. So we definitely, I think the Ripple is an example of one thing that you can do at an individual level to empower people to make choices and to understand those broader societal influences as well. But we have in Australia some great advocates as well. Shanna, People at FAIR, there's other organisations as well who are arguing and putting forward evidence for solutions that act at that societal level as well as that kind of policy level as well. So we need a balance for sure.
And Cass, may I add to that? It's really interesting. You were talking about what opposition did I get, Rob, and it was immense, because it's called contempt prior to investigation. People were so ready to assume we were going to be prohibitionists and evangelists and this, that, and the other. And I was like, you guys, my husband drinks beer. There's beer in our fridge. Do you really think the greatest, most drunk human in rural Australia is going to be sitting here judging? No. So it's extraordinary. See, people are very quick to become very defensive when the topic of alcohol is raised because it's uncomfortable. and it's very awkward. And if this is helpful for people listening to draw it into their conversations, you know, it's like the age-old adage of we don't show people by telling, we show people by doing. And you don't preach, you don't demonize, you don't marginalize, you don't evangelize, you just chip away and you make it inclusive and friendly and warm, and you drag in different, like some days I'll make my posts focused on women, other days I am laser focused on blokes. I share the love, I take it all on, because it all needs to be taken on, you know. And it's really fascinating. One of the most effective things that I believe as a nation we can do, and we're not doing anywhere near enough of it, is drag in lived experience people to work alongside extraordinary academics like Cass and Sandra. You know, look, and as I'll say to anybody, look at me. Well, there's nothing special going on here, but because it's one voice speaking simple truth again and again in a way that is relatable to others, our impact has been extraordinary, despite no funding, no support, nothing. We have ploughed through just because it's lived experience, it's relatable. So when you take a Rob and a Sandra and a Cass and a Hello Sunday Morning and a Fair, and like we were saying before, collaboratively as a nation, we work on social impact, call our politicians to account, call big alcohol to account, and just say, you know, no one is telling anyone what to do or how to do it or when to do it. And like I say to everybody, we're not anti-alcohol, we are pro-choice. And people cannot make an informed decision about what they're doing to their body without full access to the information. And big alcohol is not going to want to tell people that, you know, a bottle of wine for a lady at night is going to contribute to potential breast cancer.
Yeah.
It's not sexy, it's not pretty, it's not going to sell their product. So yeah, I think advocacy and lived experience, people who've been through that and lost everything because they fell for the glorious campaign, are the most powerful things we can do. I really believe that.
Right. And as Amrilla says, you know, peer support's incredibly
It's so good.
so important. Sandra, can I just ask you to change a little bit about the different age groups of women increasing drinking at different rates? Is this happening, and what accounts for that?
If you would know what accounts for that, we would be
Ahead of the game.
Researchers.
Yeah.
Yeah, particular age groups increase. So it's especially the group Shanna already mentioned before. So it's those from 40 to 65, which all of a sudden show a different consumption pattern than the cohorts who came before them. And I think one of the explanations we came up with is this group is usually the one that is now working full-time, because work for women is far more widespread than it was in earlier decades. Mm. These women are taking on the childcare responsibilities, as Cass already mentioned. This is less shifted, so the kind of women were responsible, women are still more responsible for children. It doesn't mean that men don't do more than they used to, but it wasn't the kind of same growth in picking up the job for mom, and at the same time dad's doing the laundry and cooking for the kids. So there is an imbalance, and I think this imbalance is likely to create stresses for these women. Other factors might be they have the opportunity because they have work colleagues, they can go out after work drinks, they have the financial support to buy the alcohol because it's expensive as well. So I think it's a multitude of different potential reasons that may have contributed to this rise. We still have to see how it goes with future cohorts. We know that young people in Australia at the moment drink less. What we don't know yet is whether they simply pick it up later in life and may increase to the same level. So this is something that we still need to do research in. But at the moment, I think it's particularly the group of 40 to 65-year-old women, which show a trend towards an increased consumption.
Yeah, thanks. Just got a couple of, coming back to the industry, a comment here from Jason Ferrer saying, so it's a good question about the moralising consumption. I wonder if we think of this from the view of the industry. If the alcohol industry had its way, then women would drink just as much as men. if women drink just as much as men, it's plausible that the harms associated with alcohol from women would also parallel those of the harms from men. So the alcohol industry doesn't want gendered moralising, they want equality, but in favour of more consumption. Really interesting point. What's your view?
If I can jump in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say before, is in women's, the change in gender roles with women being more in the workforce and being allowed to do things that they weren't do, that's part of it, but that's something that the industry wants people to see. They want to latch onto that. They want to sell messages about drinking alcohol being a reflection of, you know, like a woman choosing to do this. And so I think it's, yeah, they're definitely tied together. I agree that if we don't have these conversations and if we don't focus on women at all, then you're right, we might come to a place where the harms experienced by men and women are actually equalized, and that's why we need to talk about it, even if at the moment there is some differences in the levels of consumption that we see at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unlike tobacco, to be honest. I mean, you know, part of the tobacco industry was how in the hell do we get women's tobacco prevalence up? It's been their major push for 50 years. Yeah.
And just to add to that, because yeah, I definitely agree with what Kat said, but what we have to keep in mind, males and females are different, and the impacts on the female body for alcohol are more severe at the same level than they are for men. So if the alcohol industry is pushing for women to consume the same way in a kind of egalitarian approach, it might be good for the selling rates on a short rate, but it will harm women far more than it will harm men to the same, at the same amount. So I think that's also something we have to acknowledge. Women will pay a higher price for consuming the same amount of alcohol.
And thanks, Sandra. Shanna, you've got to go. We'd love to hear your farewell, and just thanks so much for being online. We've really enjoyed this.
Look, honestly, and I just didn't want to dash off without saying goodbye. So may I say thank you, Cassandra, Suzanne, Rob, and everybody who's listening. Yeah, I encourage people to get your mitts on lived experience, people, bring them into the chat. It will change the game, I believe, forever and ever. And those who haven't watched Addicted Australia yet, the SBS show that's been airing, you only have to watch the responses to the little girl, Heidi, God bless her socks, the girl right at the end of that show who said, why aren't we talking about this? And your heart just broke into 2 million pieces. So it's such powerful stuff. So thank you for allowing us and me and our charity to be part of the chat and to represent the bush, because it's really nice to see some representation happening. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your meeting. It's really nice to see you guys.
Thanks, Shanna.
Bye.
Thanks, Shanna.
See ya.
Thank you very much. Now, continuing along the line of where the alcohol industry, Paul O'Brien raises a really interesting question about you know, how the alcohol industry, their product development is contributing to increased drinking. And Jason made the point before about product sizes, but Paul is also pointing out that the products themselves are changing. Diet wines, rosés, mixers, alcoholic seltzers, and her view is that the more artistic labelling of wine has also started to change women's views of alcohol.
Yeah, so that's part of, if you want to get a population to do something that they weren't doing before, and selling your product in a different way doesn't work, then you try and find a product that makes it more appealing for them to do the behavior. And so that's exactly what this is. So it's looking at, you know, if women aren't drinking Cooper's Pale Ale, well, what will they drink? Okay, and they, you know, tweak and develop their products and learn from how those new products, how people respond to them over time. A lot of money goes into research and development when it comes to any industry, but the alcohol industry is no exception. And so they're specifically, those are representations of them looking for products that will increase people's consumption, and specifically in those examples, women's consumption. The same way that, you know, Alka Pops we talked about 10 years ago, so those vodka cruisers and things like that. clearly appealing to the younger market. And so, yeah, there's just different ways that they're trying to target women. And absolutely, the product development is one of the tactics up their sleeve.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks. Just coming back to a sort of slightly more technical question, but very important about artificial intelligence and the algorithms you were talking about, actually, Cass. So if they're optimized to allure people, both men and women, to drink alcohol by stimulating some kind of senses during their vulnerable moments, how do we intend counteracting these algorithms, given the odds against winning is very hard, as the algorithm knows a lot more, a lot of information that we've in fact given them about individuals. So how do we deal with that?
But you can't give up, can you?
No,
You can't just say,
I'm completely on your side.
it's tough. The technology is amazing. It's scary and amazing. There's luckily some researchers who are very tech savvy as well, even within the Centre for Alcohol Policy Research, who are looking at ways to use algorithms too. And there's different applications that they can be used for instance, screening or blocking ads that do show alcohol if you choose to want to screen that out. So that's, there's different ways that we can fight fire with fire. But public health, we've made incredible advancements in different health areas over time, but we've also been behind the 8 ball in a lot of topics for a long time. And I think when it comes to social media, we need to understand how it's working. We need to understand how the algorithms target, what they're doing, even just to crack the code of like, what are adolescents and young people seeing on their feeds? What do the algorithms push to them? As well as, how are they targeting women? Because at the moment, as I said, I can't see what's on anyone else's feed. So doing research in this area is really challenging. Either way, we have to understand the technology as well as we can, and then we have to work out how we harness it, as well as the ongoing advocacy work to try and regulate it, because I think at the moment, at least, the regulation's not there, it's out of control.
Yeah, very much agree with what Cass has said. At the moment, we are running behind, and we don't have the financial resources or the kind of access to the data that is collected by these algorithms. And I think all we can do at the moment is trying to keep up with the development, trying to develop things that can use it to our favor, but at the same time inform people that this is happening. And it's difficult, I agree, because it's not only using an algorithm that's showing you something at a given moment in time, it's using your own psychology against you. So you have to outplay yourself in a way of not falling for these kind of things, which makes it even more tricky. But I think explaining to people that this can happen, and maybe giving them a few tools that can actually just stop this kind of automatic process, going to the fridge, getting the bottle, filling the glass, having another one 30 minutes later. If it's just this moment of 2.5 seconds of reflection, is this really what I need? May give us a little advantage in a kind of unfair game, to be honest.
Yeah, and it was interesting that someone pointed out before in your discussion around Cass about the all the influences you're getting online. I think it's a question of, do you accept the terms and conditions? I mean, there are ways that we can actually protect ourselves by notifications, by those sorts of things that can actually help individuals at least.
Absolutely. I mean, to sign up to Facebook in the first place, you have to accept terms and conditions, and when they update them, you receive an email. But I would say that a lot of the population isn't reading them. For instance, with this delivery app, I don't particularly remember reading the terms and conditions. And so if I'm a pretty well-educated person, I'm pretty fortunate, and I've got pretty good literacy, but making sense of that stuff is tough at the best of times. And so I think leaving it down to the individual level for a person to understand what they're signing up to, I don't think that's necessarily the only way to go about it. I don't know if anyone watched The Social Dilemma, but that was an interesting conversation around notifications and shining a light on the fact that tech companies are trying to trigger behavior change, not just not just engage with you. And so, yes, you can turn your notifications off. Yes, I deleted that app. There are things you can do as well, but just like trying to prevent road accidents, there's a place for policy. There's a place for policy to affect change. And I think in this case, regulation is something that's needed when you consider, as I said before, this is an extremely harmful product that just happens to be highly normalized. So regulation's appropriate.
So I think, yeah, for all kind of different research areas, for all kind of different areas in your life, you have to give active consent. And I think for a lot of these things, you actually can't. Because even if you get 150-page long terms and references, who's reading that? I think the normal reading time for these kind of things is milliseconds, not even seconds, because people just click on I accept and that's it. So I think if we could come to a kind of, I actively agree what I want to share and what I want to be shared, this would be already a big step. But at the moment, that's not what's going to happen. So we can't even knowingly refuse something because this simply refuses us access to a survey or to a kind of service. So if we don't click the terms of reference, we are not going to be on Facebook. Will be isolated. So there is no way. Either you accept it or you don't. But if you don't, then you're not going to play with us. So it's kind of tough. It's a forced consent in a way.
Yeah. And that's why it's called the social dilemma. I mean, the dilemma is you have a high, social media, the fact, an advertising company, and a very powerful one at that. So it's how we manage that. I mean, we've got about 3 minutes more. And both Sandra and Cass, I'll ask you for your last words as we sign off. But also, we've just been talking about, well, for the future, you've raised the issue, Cass, about policy. I mean, issues around health and education from early years has been raised by participants, and also the notion of banning advertising, as we've done with tobacco products, has been raised. So where do you see, I guess, the most feasible policy interventions, the most feasible regulatory interventions in the future?
I think we're still a little way off from understanding how to regulate social media and some of that really algorithm-based advertising properly. But I think absolutely that should be somewhere that we invest a lot of time in understanding, advocating, and creating effective policies for. And there's lots of conversations happening about that around the world. So I think we'll get there, but part of the problem is keeping up with ever evolving technology as well. So I think regulation in that area is absolutely necessary. I don't have the answer on the tip of my tongue of what that looks like right now. Yeah. In terms of other policies, there's pricing-based policies, some of which are implemented in Australia. And I'm in the Northern Territory right now, and we have minimum unit pricing, which is quite a different way of taxing alcohol differentially in ways that target different types of drinking and different sections of the population. They're doing that in the UK, in Scotland, and I think that maybe that's something that, as the evidence around that rolls out, that we might think about doing in the future as well. Okay. But yeah, just one more second is culture change is part of this as well. And I think that's where women have a role to play. So we create culture. Culture's not static. And so women supporting other women to not drink or to make choices is, we need to get around each other the same way that Shanna talked about it.
And I think women may have to lead men in this regard at a societal level, absolutely. So thanks for that. I'll take that as your last word, Cass, and Sandra, ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, I thank you for the opportunity to speak about this issue, which is really close to my heart, because I don't want to moralize. I just want to inform people. I just want to give people the possibility of making informed decisions. And as you said before, women are only part of the society. If we can make change there, they have a strong voice, and their voice is getting stronger. So we can actually make a change and get another approach to alcohol where it's maybe less normative, and expected in certain situations, and more the substance that it actually is. It's a carcinogen substance that causes a lot of harm and that needs a good reflection where it's appropriate and where it is not.
Great, thanks so much, Sandra. I'd like to thank Sandra and Shanna and Cass very much for your contributions, to thank the work of the centre. It's fabulous work that you're doing, and also just to thank the participants. Thank you very much for being online, for your questions. So we weren't able to get to all of them, but really interesting questions. And I'd finally like to thank Suzanne Newton, who's organised this and done a fabulous job. So we look forward to catching you on yet another one of these public seminars for the Centre for Alcohol Policy Research. And we'll see you in the future, and may you have a safe holidays as well. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.